What's up? Welcome in to another edition of Pod Like a Champion, the blueandgold.com recruiting podcast. It's Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. I'm Patrick Engel, joined as always by our recruiting insider at blueandgold.com, Mike Singer. Mike is just very fortunate not to be snowed in up here like I basically am in South Bend. I don't know the last time that it hasn't snowed here. And my big takeaway from it is I feel bad for all the kids that don't have snow days anymore because you just go on Zoom classes. Like literally, I can only compare snow days or waking up when you realize you don't have to go to school to one thing, and that's this feeling on Christmas morning. Like it's the same kind of like elation and euphoria. So yeah, real bummer. But you don't got to deal with that in nice and not sub-zero Atlanta.
Yeah, it's 30 degrees here though, so that is probably one of the colder days we'll have all year here in the South. But yeah, I love it. The winters is great down here in the South, but I would not be saying that if I was living in South Bend. So appreciate you being our boots in the ground there. So that allows me to be where all the recruits are. We're not going to be covering any Georgia recruits today, unfortunately, but we've got some good ones to talk about, Patrick.
Absolutely. And first, we want to make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel by hitting that subscribe button under this video. Hit that thumbs up button too. Like this video if you'd be so kind. And for our podcast audience, please leave us a rating, leave us a review. We'll love you forever. And for anybody, you can get 2 free months of access to blueandgold.com by using the promo code Irish60. That's Irish60. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Patrick Engel _. That's ENGEL. And you can follow Mike at Rivals _Singer. So, Mike, we'll touch on a few recruits here that you've either put in a future cast for or guys that have announced some top groups. But why don't we get to some news that came out? I think it was actually a couple of weeks ago, but we never got around to talking about it. But I think it's worth bringing up here. And that's Jeff Quinn being named one of Rivals' top 25 recruiters of the year. He is Notre Dame's only rep on that list. Mike, you covered this class, and this is pertaining to the 2021 group. Do you agree with Jeff Quinn being Notre Dame's representative on this list?
Yeah, so I feel like this was a really good topic to discuss first. Patrick and I did not. We sent out the outline to each other. All right, here's what we're going to talk about. One of the topics was, all right, Jeff Quinn's the top 25 recruiter for the 2021 cycle. It was Charles Huff was the recruiter of the year. He was Alabama's, I believe, running backs coach and is now the Marshall head coach. So, of course, with Notre Dame finishing number 10, they were going to have a rep on there. And so, Patrick, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I sent it. So, Rivals asked the team site guys, of course, us being one of them at blueandgold.com, cover Notre Dame, for recommendations. And I sent in 2. One was Jeff Quinn. I mean, one of the best offensive line classes in the entire country with 5-star Blake Fisher, a pair of big-time 4-stars in Caleb Johnson, a flip from Auburn, and Rocco Spindler going to getting him and pulling him out of Michigan's backyard when everyone thought the Wolverines were the leader for quite some time. Pat Coogan had offers from Oklahoma, Ohio State, Michigan, Texas A&M before picking Notre Dame last spring. Joe Alt, the fan club president is Mike Singer. I love Joe Alt, and every time I mention his name, he gains 5 pounds. The dude's just a stud. So Jeff Quinn's a solid choice, but I don't agree with this, just slightly. I'm not going to argue with it. If someone feels like it should be Jeff Quinn, not going to argue. But for what the 2021 cycle has been, Patrick, I'm going with Brian Polian, the guy who led Notre Dame in all these Zoom virtual visit type stuff. He really helped Notre Dame put all these video packages together for the recruits. Pretty much was the secondary recruiter for everyone in this class. You talk to a recruit, oh yeah, I was in touch with Brian Polian, lead recruiter on some guys too, Kahanu Kia, Josh Bryan. So I mean, nothing to really write home as him being a primary recruiter, which I think that's probably why he didn't. But for how he organized and orchestrated this recruiting class, and a ton of work, not really just behind the scenes, out on the forefront too. Like these kids were talking about the relationship they had with Brian Polian. So I would have given it to him. But I understand why why Rivals went with Jeff Quinn. It does make sense.
It's almost like it's two different discussions in the sense of Polian absolutely deserves a shout out, special commendations, whatever, for turning this recruiting cycle into this Zoom virtual, not in person situation. And that's not easy because everybody had to do it at once. And from all accounts of parents and recruits we've talked to, Notre Dame was incredibly polished when they shifted to that and really did it without major problems. But as far as, okay, who are the guys that were signed and recruited or on campus? I think it had to be Jeff Quinn. And I've got some, as I was researching this, I kind of figured like, all right, well, we know Jeff Quinn pulled in multiple Rivals 100 offensive linemen in this class. So I got to thinking, and this is a little bit of how my brain works and how I can just go down these things, researching things. I mean, this is just what you get with the Pod Like a Champion crack staff here. But these are the teams that signed multiple Rivals 100 players at the same position in the 2021 cycle. Alabama did it 5 times. Ridiculous. Ohio State, 3 positions. Texas A&M and LSU, 2 positions where they had multiple Rivals 100 players in this cycle. Oregon, Clemson, Maryland, and Florida signed multiple Rivals 100 players at 1 position, along with Notre Dame. That's pretty good company for Jeff Quinn to have his offensive line class, or just class at a particular position, be in. When you look at all these teams, I mean, you see playoff participants and teams that frequently reside in the top 5 to 10 of the recruiting rankings, which of course is where we all know that you all want Notre Dame to be. So that's that. And where Notre Dame wants itself to be. And I know this is about 2021, but here's just a list of where Jeff Quinn's recruits from 2019 through what's partially done in 2022 stack up in the Rivals 250 or at their position. So told you 2021. Let's dive into that first. Blake Fisher, 25th, 5-star. Pat Coogan, 3-star, 36 ranked tackle. Joe Alt, mid-level 3-star, not ranked at the position. 67th overall. Rocco Spindler, 4-star, 31st overall ranked, or 4-star, 31st ranked tackle. Caleb Johnson. 2022, 179th overall. Joey Tenona. 189th. Ty Chan. 2020, 231st overall. Michael Carmody. 137th. Tosh Baker. 2019, 118th. John Olmsted. 4-star, number 32 ranked offensive tackle. Andrew Kristofic. 68th overall. Quinn Carroll. 114th overall. Zeke Corral. That's pretty good.
Fire Jeff Quinn. Fire Jeff Quinn, am I right?
Exactly. And if you want some comparison, Harry Hiestand, his true signing classes were where he had at least a full cycle to do this. 2013 to 18. His best ones, I went back through this, were 2013 and 14. Each time signed 2 top 100 offensive linemen in each of those classes. So, I mean, if you look at it, this 2021 group from Jeff Quinn, I think, stacks up pretty close to Hiestand's best group in 2013 and 14. Everybody loves to hold Quinn in particular, but any offensive line coach, to a Harry Hiestand standard. I can't blame them for that. But when you look at this particular Notre Dame offensive line signing group that Jeff Quinn did a lot of the work on, really a large majority of the work on, it stacks up pretty well with what Notre Dame has brought in the last decade. And as I read you the other results, Quinn's been pulling in a lot of highly ranked guys, highly coveted guys, which is exactly the expectation when you have the track record of developing offensive linemen that Notre Dame does. And Mike, I think you'll touch on this in a little bit, but that 2022 class that already has a pair of top 200 guys, I think from everything you've said and reported, and is looking like it's going to be a big class that Notre Dame's in really good shape with a lot of guys who were in similar rankings and similar positions as the ones that Notre Dame had pulled in the prior three classes.
Jeff Quinn's done a phenomenal job on the recruiting front. When Notre Dame was still very much in the thick of its 2021 class, let's say summer of 2020, Quinn was still very much involved in having weekly conversations with those 2022 guys before he's even allowed to text them and say, just shoot them a text, hey, give me a call at this time. Like, that's pretty much how coaches are doing it now with the 2022s. But before September 1st of their junior year, you can't do that. But he was still building the early foundations with guys like Ty Cham and guys like Joey Tenona. And you mentioned, we'll touch on another guy here in a minute, Billy Schrouth, who I feel like is a Notre Dame lean still since last summer, really. Notre Dame is still very much involved there, and I feel like is likely to get his commitment. So Notre Dame is in offensive line recruiting, it's still very, very good. So like I said, Patrick, I'm not going to argue on it. I think Jeff Quinn is a very good choice. If you stacked up the resumes for Polian and Quinn and any other year, like let's just say you put what happened in the 2021 recruiting class last year or a non-pandemic year, right? Yeah, I think Quinn would be the easy choice. But the only reason I'm going, or the main reason I'm going with Polian there is because of what 2020 was, what this past year was, just kind of nutty and unconventional to say the least.
Yeah, and anyone who would choose that for whatever school they cover, whether it's whoever did that for Alabama or Ohio State or Purdue or literally name anything, I can't say that's a dumb choice because this was a thing that no one expected and had to adapt to on the fly, and that's not easy. But yeah, and if I'm looking at this from the purely of who at the position was signed and what the class looks like, yeah, I think it's pretty clear with Jeff Quinn. And I'll end it with this. I think this is a big year for him, both recruiting and on the field, but let's not act like this is a prove it type of situation. Like, he's already signed a class that compares with Notre Dame's best offensive line classes of the last 10 years. Like you said, 2022 is shaping up to be really strong again. Of course, you'd like to get Zach Rice, a 5-star offensive tackle. Maybe that's a longer shot from going off of your prior reporting here, Mike, but not getting him in the class, if that is indeed what happens, doesn't mean the class still can't be really, really good. And I don't want to go too far into the team-centric area here, but I think it's worth mentioning this. Yeah, Notre Dame's going to have 4 new starters on its offensive line, but when he took over in 2018, that 2018 line, for all intents and purposes, had 3 first-year starters. I mean, yes, Robert Hainsey started a bowl game as a freshman, but I mean, come on, he's not coming in here with loads of experience in half a year of starting under his belt. Those 3 new starters, Robert Hainsey, Aaron Banks, Liam Eichenberg, all conference players. Banks, a consensus All-American. Eichenberg, I believe, appeared on an All-American team from one of the 5 major outlets. 3 likely draft picks. Jeff Quinn had a big hand in that.
Do you hear that? Do you hear that out there, Patrick? Oh, no. I don't hear any Jeff Quinn haters. I thought I heard them. No, I haven't heard them in a while. So where are you at, guys? Because I ain't hearing anything from those folks recently. It's been very quiet.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, a year where he has a lot of work cut out, but I think it's at the point now where you look at it as, yeah, he has the track record of succeeded in this spot before, and it's a thing where you kind of expect him to figure it out until there's evidence that he doesn't, instead of the other way around. All right, let's move on. We'll stay on offense, but we'll go to 2022. Notre Dame still putting in some work on Caden Saunders, the 4-star receiver from the Columbus, Ohio area. Committed to Penn State this summer, was a big target Notre Dame before that. Mike, as you have written, and I believe as Rivals Josh Helmholt wrote after he saw him at a combine this past weekend, I believe it was, Notre Dame is not done recruiting Caden Saunders. So where do you see Notre Dame standing in this race, and what you think the Irish can do in terms of realistic chances or him listening to Notre Dame and what they might still be telling.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame's got a very good shot. Honestly, I kind of see him as an uncommitted guy. With how much he's talking to other schools, Notre Dame's not the only school that's still recruiting him. That's that's not Penn State too. I mean, Florida State, Oregon were a couple other schools. So, I mean, he committed to Penn State last July, and Notre Dame really never gave up here. They always stayed in contact, once a week, kind of checking in. And then since the season ended, so just really in the past month, Notre Dame has picked up contact with Caden Saunders. So he's listening. He's talking to Notre Dame. This is a guy who Notre Dame offered February 1st, 2020. That was the last time Notre Dame had a big recruiting junior day. That's when he got his offer. And then honestly, Patrick, Notre Dame, from what I had gathered, didn't really recruit him hard for like a couple of months. Contact kind of fell off. Like I mentioned with Jeff Quinn, you can't be texting the kids before September 1 of junior year. So the contact kind of fell off. Saunders wasn't calling Notre Dame as much, and then it kind of picked up again April or May, and Tommy Reese was really involved in the recruitment, and Dell Alexander as well, of course, and but it just seemed kind of too little too late. And then Penn State, who had offered him earlier, so Notre Dame made a nice run at it, and then he commits to Penn State. But like I said, Notre Dame continued the recruitment. They didn't stop and then pick it up later. Continued it, and now they're really picking it up. It's heating up. Zoom calls with Caden Saunders, daily, text messaging, getting on the phone once or twice a week. So, I'm not a big percentages guy, but I could certainly see Saunders opening up his recruitment. And if he does, you would have to like Notre Dame, with the familiarity that he has with the Fighting Irish. He's been on campus multiple times, visited a couple times for a game, at least twice that I can remember. And then for the February 1st junior day last year. So the familiarity is there. So that's good for Notre Dame, but it's not going to be like a slam dunk, instant flip or anything like that from my read on the situation. But, I mean, Patrick, he's an explosive player. Talk about speed. Notre Dame fans want speed, and he's got that. For our YouTube audience, we have his junior film up here on the screen, and just in our interactions and with Notre Dame fans on our blueandgold.com message board, like I said, fans love speed, and this is what this guy brings. So one thing I want to mention real quick, Patrick, before we get your thoughts on this recruitment is Notre Dame's also recruiting another pair of slot players, Tyler Morrison and Kayla Brown from Chicago. So if Notre Dame does get any of those three, I'm not 100% sure what they would want to do next, because you don't want a class full of just slot guys. You want to have a well-balanced group. So that's one thing that would be interesting, but a good problem to have. I'm sure Notre Dame wouldn't mind to have that problem and kind of face that.
Mike, did you just make history on this podcast? Is this the first time you've entertained a hypothetical? It might be. I don't know if that would be extensive, time-consuming research for the crack staff to figure out. We might have to outsource that one to the listeners here. But I don't remember you entertaining a hypothetical before.
Is that really? Do I not do that? I
no,
don't like
we just talked about it last week. Yeah, here we are, 180 turn. But no, it is interesting, just in that when you look at the 2022 receivers who Notre Dame is consistently in contact with and recruiting, Saunders, Tyler Morris out of Chicago, Caleb Brown from Chicago, are three names that come up with guys they're consistently talking to and guys who've been receptive. And like you said, they all play that kind of same position and have the same build. So yeah, you wonder what would happen and how many they would want to take. And even it's not like these guys aren't useful, but if you only have room for two or three receivers, do you want all of them to be ones that play that same position? Probably not. But I mean, at this point, I would think Notre Dame's mindset is let's just get one of them and see what happens from there, and they'll decide it. I can't imagine we'd hear of anything anytime soon of lightening up contact with one of those three as they stand here, with none of them having committed to Notre Dame, or even looking at it where a possibility of it is none of them commit to Notre Dame. So, but in terms of hypotheticals, this one is actually interesting and merits some. It's worth asking, and I'm sure the question naturally comes up for a lot of fans who follow this closely too. So we'll see, but yeah, I would imagine that that's something that comes up later on.
Patrick, I apologize for our podcast audience, but man, watching his junior tape is impressive. He's the punter. That's a great weapon if he actually is punting, and he's not just like a fake punter going in. Like, wow, to just have him do those fake punt runs. Like, he had that 105-yard interception return for a touchdown a few plays ago. I mean, wow, this kid's impressive. But on the hypothetical point, so I hope I can express this correctly. When there are just so many variables, it's ridiculous. Like, hey, Mike, if we get this kid, but then this kid commits here, but then will we go after this kid? But what about this kid's visit plans? And then this kid's, it's like, oh my God, calm down. Like, things could change at the drop of a hat. Someone could get injured. A kid could enter the transfer portal. A kid could decommit from Notre Dame. It could decommit from Penn State. And then, like, there's just so many things. But this one you see as less variables. Like, you have, like, Notre Dame's typically going to bring in somewhere between 2 and 4 receivers in any given recruiting class. And you have these 3 big name Midwest slot guys. So it just kind of, there's not a ton of variables. Now, if you start to throw in some of these speedier slot guys from Texas that they have offered into the mix, okay, then we're kind of opening it up. But I mean, it's like with linebacker recruiting, Notre Dame's in the mix for like 7-8 guys that are big name players. And hey Mike, if we get this guy, are we then gonna slow down for this guy and then really make a push for this? I'm like, I do this for a living. I talk to sources all over the country, especially some in South Bend, and I will even entertain or propose those questions to those people. And it's, I don't know, like we gotta let this first domino fall before we get to the 19th domino. So that's kind of my hypothetical thoughts there. My thoughts on hypothetical.
I can feel the disdain through the computer screen. But no, you articulated that well. And yeah, there's fewer variables here. You have 3 players, all of whom are receptive and interested in Notre Dame. And a plausible outcome is that one of them commits and another is still very interested. So what do you do? Yes, that's not particularly knocking over all these things to get to that point like it would be at other positions. But at the same time, ultimately it's Notre Dame just wants that first domino to fall right now. All right, going back to offensive line here. We teased a little bit that we get into some 2022 offensive line discussion. Touched on Billy Strauth, Mike, but another big target on the offensive line in that 2022 class, Jake Taylor, the 4-star offensive tackle out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, announced top 3 on Monday of Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Alabama. Mike, I believe you have a FutureCast pick in, if I'm not mistaken, for Notre Dame to land Jake Taylor. But now that he has trimmed the list to this point and put those 3 schools on it, where do you see this one standing now?
Yeah, I think the picture's a little bit more blurry than when I put you're correct. I did put a FutureCast pick in for Notre Dame to land him. I believe that pick was back in December. And at that point, it was really just Notre Dame and Oklahoma. USC was kind of running third. But, I just felt that Jake Taylor, with how his recruitment with Notre Dame was progressing, that he would find his way out to campus, get to Notre Dame, even for a self-guided tour in January or something, February. And that would put Notre Dame over the top. He went to Oklahoma, I believe it was December 5th. The Sooners had a home game and were allowing spectators and not just, parents of families and, students like Notre Dame was. So Jake Taylor's able to go to, an Oklahoma game a couple months ago. So he has that experience at Oklahoma, and he hasn't been to Notre Dame yet. So that's still my cause and caution, with Notre Dame, and now he's supposed to have a spring season here. Bishop Gorman's supposed to be playing, potentially as soon as March. So he's going to be focused on that. So when does he get to Notre Dame? The longer it drags out, I think that might play better in Notre Dame's hand because that'll give him more opportunities to visit. But then Alabama offered just 4 days before he put out his top group. So that, look, anytime Alabama offers, it's notable. So, now you have Alabama entering the mix. They instantly make the top 3. So that's kind of why I was feeling, I'm not feeling as good as I previously was. And look, he is a Notre Dame type kid. Fantastic player. Notre Dame offensive line coach Jeff Quinn loves him and is prioritizing him. They just had a virtual visit with him. I believe it was last week, or some kind of presentation on Zoom. So I think the next step for Notre Dame here might be getting Tommy Rees and Brian Kelly really involved in the process. In kind of trying to close here. But, Jake Taylor is someone that Notre Dame really wants.
Well, if Notre Dame lands him, I feel pretty confident that he would be the first recruit in Notre Dame history who has this Benjamin Button aging process going on where he can play for the Cleveland Indians in the 1990s and then 25 years later be a coveted high school football recruit.
See, I'm not a baseball guy, so...
Oh, come on. You didn't get the Major League reference? You're killing me, Smalls.
Okay, I got the Sandlot reference.
Thank you. All right, I'll settle for 1 for 2.
Okay.
Batting 500, which, since you don't follow baseball, that's pretty good. All right, we'll give it to you. Stay out west in your newest FutureCast pick that went in Monday night for 4-star linebacker out of Southern California, junior Tui Halabaka, former USC commit. You put in your FutureCast last night. Let's hear your thoughts on why and how you see this recruitment having played out since Notre Dame entered the mix. I believe it was in the last month when Marcus Freeman joined the staff.
Yeah, so typically with like these crystal balls and future casts, you there's 2 schools of thought here. There's the, I just got a tip that this kid's about to commit, so I'm going to put in a pick. And then there's kind of the projection. I'm hearing really good things here. I feel like this one can trend towards, the insert school name here landing this kid. So for Nuafe Jr. Tui Halamalaka, I feel like it's more of the latter. He hasn't been to Notre Dame's campus. I'm told he really wants to. Conversations with Marcus Freeman, Brian Polian have been very good. His favorite player, Manti Te'o, his high school head coach is Casey Clausen, brother of Jimmy Clausen, former Notre Dame quarterback. So there's just kind of things working in Notre Dame's favor here. Junior's a big academic kid. Notre Dame wants him. Marcus Freeman's built a really solid connection. Brian Polian recruited Tui Halamalaka's favorite player, again in Teo, to Notre Dame. So there's just a lot of things. And then in talking to sources that, when you hear these things, you like them. And then again, for the YouTube audience, pop on his tape here. He's an impressive player, ranked as the number 65 overall prospect per Rivals in the Nation and number 1 inside linebacker in the land. And this is a pretty versatile player. I feel like he could play, and we're still not 100% sure on the specifics of the Marcus Freeman defense and exactly what that's going to look like. But, in a multiple front, 3-man or 4-man defensive line, like he could, play behind a defensive tackle as an inside backer. He could play out in space as an outside linebacker. He could rush off the edge. He can, even put his hand in the dirt and be a Viper defensive. So there's just a lot of things that he provides. I know that he does defensive line training and pass. So he's works on his pass rush skill. So there's just a lot to like here as a prospect. There's a lot to like here in terms of where Notre Dame stands in the recruitment. But again, it's a projection pick. My biggest concern here is Stanford. USC still in the mix. I think Florida's a little bit in there. Maybe Cal or UCLA. Not super concerned with there, but maybe Oregon too is a school to watch. But it's really, for me, it's Stanford and Notre Dame, which again points to how great of a student he is, considering those two schools so highly and having offers. But if he's not able to get to Notre Dame, you would feel like for him Stanford would be the more comfortable option in state. But again, I felt like I had enough information to put in that FutureCast pick for Notre Dame.
In one of those where the extension of the dead period past April 15th, I don't believe that's official yet, but going to happen. It's been recommended by the Football Oversight Committee. One of those where that really hurts if you were looking at, hey, maybe the dead period ends in April. He wants to visit. Now, does he wait a little longer to visit, or still wants to visit in the spring, but obviously it would be a self-guided tour that he can't meet any of the coaches. So yeah, that's a tough break, as it is for, Jake Taylor and so many other guys here. But that was my reaction when you when you mentioned like a visit here or something he really wants to do, and seems like it could be a big step to helping Notre Dame's chances. Dead period in particular, I thought was tough news for this recruitment. But like you said, a lot of things around him that work in Notre Dame's favor. And of course, Marcus Freeman, Brian Polian have put in some good work there. So one to watch probably for a longer haul type of thing. But all right, I think that's going to do it, Mike, for this edition of Pod Like a Champion. Again, use that promo code Irish60 to get 2 free months of blueandgold.com access. Follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _ at Rivals _ Singer. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just takes one click of a button. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast for our podcast audience if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We will talk to you again next week. Until then, take care.